Hello and welcome. My name is Marc Stettner, and I am a project management specialist with Continental Automotive and a project management instructor for the University of Alabama. Today I'm going to explain to you how to fill out your application to take the PMP exam. First, I will review the eligibility requirements. Then I will show you how to break down your experience so that you can meet the eligibility requirements. And finally, I'll demonstrate the use of a supplemental worksheet which you can use to help you get organized prior to filling out the application. All right, let's review the PMP requirements in more detail before we start talking about filling out the application. First of all, if you recall, there are two options which you can apply for the exam. Option 1 is with a high school diploma. Option 2 is with a bachelor's degree, and in both cases you may have a global equivalent of one of these two options. Let's talk about option 1 first. Well, in option 1 with the high school diploma or equivalent, you're going to need a minimum of 5 years or 60 months of what we call unique non-overlapping experience, during which at least 7,500 hours were spent leading and directing project tasks. And of course, you'll need the 35 contact hours of formal education. And in both cases, option 1 and option 2, you still have the same 35 contact hours of formal education. Let's take a look now at option 2. That's with a bachelor's degree. Again, with that, you need a minimum of 3 years, 36 months of unique, non-overlapping professional project management experience. We're going to talk about unique, non-overlapping experience and what that means in the following slides. But for option 2, during these 36 months, you will need at least 4,500 hours that were spent leading and directing project tasks. So let's take a look at this, how this would lay out in more detail. Alright, now I'm going to talk to you about how to document your chronological 36 months and your cumulative 4,500 hours that you would need if you have a bachelor's degree. So let's come down here and take a look at example 1, which is non-overlapping projects, meaning that you worked on one project at a time, maybe not 100%, but you were assigned to only one project. Now, if you recall, you can go back 8 years from today to document your project experience. And in that past 8 years, you're going to need to accumulate 36 months of chronological time and 4,500 hours of project management time. So let's take a look at this example. So we're at time 0, or today, and we go back 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 year, etc. And let's say project 1 that you want to document, you worked on 7 years ago. You were assigned 50% to that project, and you worked on that project for 2 years, or 24 months. So we would come up here to our table, project 1. We accumulated 24 chronological months. Now, this is regardless of the percentage. Now, notice we were only assigned 50%. We still get credit for 24 months. Now, let's say that we accumulate approximately 2,000 hours per year, and we were 50%. So we were accumulating 1,000 hours per year on this project. Now, let's come down here and see what we did next. Well, next we worked on project 2. Of course, we took a year off here and did other work and didn't work on projects. But 4 years ago, we worked on project 2, and again we were applied 50% for 2 years. So we're going to accumulate 24 months. We're going to accumulate 2,000 hours, and then we took another year off, did not do project work. And finally, project 3, which we're currently on, we've been working on for the past 12 months, but we've been applied only 25% to this project. So at 2,000 hours a year, 25%, we would accumulate 500 hours. Okay, so now let's take a look at our totals. Well, our total hours is 4,500 hours within the past 8 years. That would qualify us. And our total chronological is 48 months. That would qualify us since we only need 36 months. So this is an example of how to document your project work in the case that you have non-overlapping projects. And next we'll take a look at overlapping projects. Alright, now let's take a look at example 2, where we've got the case where to document your project experience requires overlapping projects. Overlapping projects means that you were assigned to more than one project at a time. So in this case, let's take a look. Let's start by looking at Project 1. Project 1, you started 4.5 years ago. You were assigned 25% to Project 1, and you stopped 2 years ago. So this is a total of 2.5 years. Now let's go back up to our table, Project 1, chronological. We would document 30 months or 2.5 years, and we would get 30 months chronological credit for that. Now, in those 2.5 years, we would also get cumulative hours. So with a total of 2,000 possible hours per year at 25% per year, we would accumulate 500 hours per year. So in the case of 2.5 years, this would give us a total of 1,250 hours. Now let's go next to Project 2. Now Project 2, we started 4 years ago, and we were assigned to Project 1 and Project 2 at the same time. So we were 50% on Project 2 and 25% on Project 1, and then perhaps 25% on non-project work. But in any case, let's take a look at Project 2 next. Now, if we go up to Project 2 and look at chronologically, notice we would not get any additional chronological credit for Project 2 because it was we've already accumulated those months under Project 1, and this Project 2 is in parallel with Project 1. But we do get cumulative hours for this project, and notice that we're 50% on this project for 2 years, and that would give us 2,000 hours approximately for that project. Okay? And now finally, we're currently on Project 3, and we're assigned 75%, and we've been working, say, for the past 12 months on this project. So what can we do with that? Well, come back up to our table. We will get 12 months chronological time for that project. It's not in parallel with any others. And we would get credit for 75% of 2,000 hours over the last 12 months, or 1,500 hours. So now let's add up our totals. Our cumulative hours, we're going to get 4,750 hours, so that qualifies us. And chronologically, we would get 42 months, and that qualifies us. So this is the way that we can document overlapping projects. Okay, well, so far we've talked about how to document your total experience to make sure that you've got 4,500 hours and at least 36 months in the case of option 2 when you have a bachelor's degree. Alright, that's what we call the level 1 breakdown, meaning that you have the total hours for each project. Now, when you actually fill out your application, you're going to need additional breakdown and distribution of your hours specifically. So let's take a look and go back to example 1 where we had our project 1, project 2, and project 3 non-overlapping. And let's take a look at and see what PMI will require of you to further, in terms of further breaking down your hours. Well, we're going to need to go to what we call level 2. Level 2 means that we take the 2,000 hours from project 1 and we have to break it down into what PMI calls the 5 process groups: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. So we'll have to take the 2,000 hours and break it down, for example, 100 hours towards initiating, 400 hours towards planning, 1,000 hours towards executing, 400 towards monitoring and control, and 100 hours closing. This total has to equal the 2,000 hours. So this is what we call a level 2 breakdown. So level 1 breakdown would not be sufficient when you fill out your application. You would also need to go to level 2. Okay, continuing on with our example, we have our project 1 where we worked 50% and we accumulated 2,000 hours. That's our level 1 breakdown. We said that we have to take that to level 2 breakdown and determine how many hours we put against each one of the 5 process groups of initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. Now, let's take a look at what you would actually have to put on the actual application with PMI. Well, you're going to have to take the amount of hours you spent on that project within that process group, and you're going to have to specify what tasks you actually worked on and how many hours you put into that task. And that's what we call the level 3 breakdown. So if we come in and we want to really allocate the 100 hours within initiating we spent on project 1, we're going to have to break it down into what we call initiating tasks. And PMI will give you the tasks and you'll have to fill in the hours. So for example, initiating, they have 5 possible tasks that you can break initiating down into. For example, the first one is how many hours did you conduct project selection methods to evaluate the feasibility of new products or services? Or perhaps task 2, did you spend time identifying key stakeholders and performing analysis to gain buy-in and requirements for the success of the project? And so on. So they give you 5 potential tasks here. And that's the level at which you will actually enter your hours in the application. Let's take a look at an actual application online that I'm filling out. So let's take our 100 hours, for example, and we have project 1, and I've already put the dates in, and now I'm at the point in the application where it says, please enter the number of hours spent on each of these tasks for this project. And this is where we have to start putting in the hours we spent on the tasks, and eventually we want to get up to 4,500 hours. Now, you'll need at least some hours in each process group to qualify, but not on every project. So it could be that only one project you worked on initiating. Furthermore, I don't believe that you will need hours in every task. So as long as you have some hours in every process group, you should qualify. So let's take a look at how I broke down the 100 hours. So for example, 25 hours I put on project selection methods, 50 hours on identifying key stakeholders, 10 hours on defining scope, and 5 hours on documenting high-level risks. So this is what you'll actually see on the exam, and it'll take you through the questions for each project. It's going to take you through the questions for each process group. So let's take a look and see if I hit next. It should take me to... Okay, so now we hit next, and we're looking at the next process group, which is planning. And notice that they've got different questions here in the planning process, and you go through the same process of allocating all your planning hours on that project. I hit next. I see executing, and it'll take me through the executing questions. Notice there's quite a few executing questions, and then it'll take me to the monitoring and controlling questions, and finally it'll take me to the closing processes. Okay, so you'll put your hours in at this level 3, and that's what we need to prepare for. Okay, now that you've had a look at the application process, it's helpful to talk about what you can do to prepare before you go and fill out your application. All right, we've got something called a work experience sheet, which will help you organize your hours into the required levels. So level 1, you can specify your projects. Level 2, you can specify what process groups you worked on and how many hours you worked within those process groups. And it will also then help you to organize down to level 3 the tasks that you worked on within those process groups. And that's very helpful to have on hand before you go and fill out your application. All right, now let's take a look at the spreadsheet that you can use to help break down your projects into the required initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, and controlling, and closing, and further break them down into the tasks. Well, let's start with the discussion about breaking down your projects, the level 1 breakdown, which is the projects that you worked on, the length of time that you worked on them, and the percentage. So let's take a look at this spreadsheet. In column A, we have a section for up to 5 projects, and default we have the yellow projects is the default name, the orange project, the green project, the purple project, and the blue project. You can put your own names in here for your own projects, but that's the default name. Let's take a look and see how we would enter our level 1 information. So let's say we worked during the year 2009, we worked on the yellow project. So we would come in here in the date column and put in 1/1/2009, and we worked on the whole year of 2009, so it'll be 1/1/2009 to 1/1/2010 is the way you'd have to enter it in this sheet. Note that the months are automatically calculated. So it automatically calculates 12 months. And now we're going to have to put a percentage that we worked on this project. And let's say we were on the yellow project 100%. Okay, so there we go, 100%. And note that we now get the number of hours automatically calculated for us that we get credit towards reaching our goal of 4,500 hours. And note that at the bottom here, it's going to add up and keep a running tally for you of how many hours you have as you enter each project. Now you'll have to keep entering projects until you get up to the 4,500 hours. Another thing to note is that the hours that are calculated are up here in the formula. You can change those. So this has 40 hours per week, assuming 4 weeks per month times the number of months. And we get, that's how we get to 1,920. Now if you only work 35 hours per week, you could change this, of course, to 35, and it's going to give you a total of 1,680 hours. So really just depends on what you feel is reasonable for your projects. I'm going to go ahead and put this back to 40 for my example. Okay, and gives me 1,920. Okay, I'm going to have to keep adding projects because I'm only up to 1,920. So let's say I work, my next project was the orange project, and let's say I worked during the whole year of 2008 on that project. So I'll come here 1/1/2008, and I'll change column C to 1/1/2009, and that will give me 12 months. Now I have to put in a percentage. Well, I was only on the orange project for 50%, so I put 50%, and it calculates my hours. So it gives me 960 hours, and now I'm up to 2,880. Okay, so I'm going to have to keep going. So let's say I worked on the green project, and let's say I was on the green project for 2 years, all of 2007 and all of 2008. So let's start here 1/1/2007 and all the way up to 1/1 all of 2008, so 1/1/2009. Okay, and then that's going to give me a full 24 months of credit. And let's say I was 50%. Now note that the green project overlaps here 1 year with the orange project. But I only have 50% on the green project, so that's acceptable. So that gives me another 1,920 hours. And lo and behold, here we go. I have my greater than 4,500 hours. I actually have 4,800 hours. So now I can stop entering the level 1 projects and go on to level 2. Now note that I also have a calculated number of months. Now note that these number of months do not, the spreadsheet does not subtract out overlapping months. So in this case, it calculates 48 months, but when in fact I really only have 36 months. So just be aware that you might have to subtract out your overlap yourself. And we have 12 months overlap, so we'll have to subtract that out and come out with 36. But we know that that's okay. All right, now let's take a look at our level 2 number of hours, our level 2 breakdown. Now remember, you're going to be required to break down the number of hours you worked on a project into what PMI calls the 5 process groups, which are initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. So what this worksheet does is assume a default percentage in each one of these process groups. So for example, the spreadsheet assumes 10% spent on initiating, 25% on planning, 30% on executing, 25% on monitoring and controlling, and 10% on closing. And these are just averages. You can change these, no problem. But what the spreadsheet does is, based on those percentages, it calculates the number of hours that you spent on that project in that process group. So for example, 10% of 1,920 for the yellow project is 192 hours. 25% of the 1920 is 480 hours. 30% is 576. 25% again is 480, and 10% again is 192. Now, if you didn't work these percentages, or let's say you didn't work on initiating at all, so you had no initiating, let's change that to 0, but you spent more time in executing. So let's change that to 40. Okay. Now we see we still add up to 100%. We still have a total of 1,920 hours, but allocated a little bit differently. Now for the level 2 breakdown, you can go through each one of your projects and you can go and reallocate the hours, but make sure that your percentages add up to 100% and allocate to roughly as close as you can to what you actually did before you go on to the next step. Okay, now that we have our level 1 and level 2 breakdown, we're going to go to the next tab on the spreadsheet, which is called Detail. And you can see these projects, the yellow, the orange, the green, purple, and blue, will all be carried over for you onto the next detail sheet. However, they'll be laid out vertically instead of horizontally. Now, remember that for the yellow project we had 1,920 hours, and that's carried over to the next sheet. For the orange we had 960, that's carried over, and for the green we had 1,920, and that's carried over. Now, if you'll note, our level 2 is also carried over. So for initiating, for the yellow, remember we changed it to 0, so we had 0 hours. For the orange project we didn't change it, and we have 96 hours for initiating, and for green we have 192 hours. Now that for the PMI application, you're going to have to break down initiating into the 5 tasks. And note that the spreadsheet also has default percentages to break down the number of hours into these specific tasks. So let's take a look at the orange project as an example for initiating. We carried over 96 hours from the previous spreadsheet from our level 2 breakdown. We know that we spent 96 hours on initiating, but now we have to allocate the 96 hours to the 5 tasks. So note that the spreadsheet has a default of 20%, so it just allocates the number of hours evenly across the 5 tasks. Now what you can do is come in here again and adjust those percentages. So the first question is conduct project selection methods to evaluate the feasibility of new products or services. Now let's say instead of spending 20% on that, you spent only 10% on that. Okay. Now when you change that, your percentages add up to only 90%. So you're going to have to change something else, and let's say task number 3, define the scope of the project based on the organizational need to meet the customer project, and let's say you actually spent 30% of your time on that. So we change that. It still adds up to 100%, and note that next to each percentage in red is a number of hours. So these hours in red are the actual hours that you would enter in the PMI application. And that's what you need to fill out the application. So you would go through the same process for each project. In this case, you have the yellow, orange, and green project. You have initiating, planning, the same thing, except for the default percentages are based on 6 tasks. So we have roughly 17%, or 1/6 of the number of hours allocated. We have executing, where we have 8 tasks allocated. So we have roughly 1/8 or 13%. And monitoring and controlling, we have 4 tasks. So we would have roughly 25%. And for closing, we have 7 tasks, or roughly 1/7 or 14%. So again, you would come in here and adjust these as necessary, or use the default percentages. But the numbers in red are the numbers that you need for the PMI application, and the numbers in blue here are the numbers carried over from the level 2 calculation from the first sheet. But overall, you can see that the spreadsheet makes it much easier for you to think about the number of hours that you've spent on each one of these tasks, which is quite difficult to really get that organized without a sheet like this. So I encourage you to download this sheet, and we also have some instructions. If you don't recall what I'm telling you here, just go through the instructions step by step, fill out the level 1, the level 2, and level 3. Either print it out or save it, and you'll be all set when you go to actually fill out your application. So good luck to you, and thank you very much. And one final reminder, now that you know how to prepare to fill out your application, when you're ready, go over to www.pmi.org and click around. Let me show you what that looks like. So when you log in to pmi.org, this is what you'll get. This is their home page. You'll need to, if you haven't registered yet, you'll have to click here and register. And then once you complete the registration process, you'll have to come down here to get certified. And that'll lead you through the process of filling out the application. So again, good luck to you, and hope to see you in a PMP boot camp. Thank you.